Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elberini Sim from the Singapore Global Network, which together with the Singapore Economic Development Board and SG Innovate, we are here to be curating 2 days full pack of programs yesterday and today for Maintain Good. So thank you so much for coming today. Just got to refer it. So for those of you who are in the room or have just joined us for this session, as you can see from the screens on our left, these are NFTs from 12 UK and Singapore-based artists. 100% of the proceeds go to the artists and the 2 charities that support disadvantaged artists. So if you're looking to purchase a piece, the Byte Hall team will be here to assist you. Now, we are coming to the very last panel of our 2-day jam-packed program, and one which I'm personally excited about. And it has been, to me, I think, a jam-packed 2 days of insightful discussions, connections, and connections. So this last panel, right, is proudly brought to you by the Singapore Global Network, which is where I'm from. So as I mentioned earlier on, I'm a division within the Singapore Economic Development Board, which connects with Singaporeans and the Friends of Singapore. So we work closely with the community, thought leaders, and advocates of Singapore to raise the awareness of Singapore and the region. So for this session, we are very pleased to have our moderator, Tanu Chalam, to lead our panel titled Searching for Answers, Getting Started in Southeast Asia. And much of this has been said about the rising potential of Southeast Asia for the tech companies and as well as for tech talent. So in this discussion, just to give you a context, we're going to dive deeper into what Singapore has to offer in terms of tech talent, startups and companies, and what to expect when setting up in Singapore, the good, the bad, as well as the ugly, I would say too, tips and challenges, and insights from fellow tech players and founders. So just a brief introduction about Tanu, our moderator. So she is a tech entrepreneur who has won awards for managing both people and products across corporate and startup environments. So globally as well. So in the past 15 years, as vice president at Selden, she's responsible for building up the product management, design, developer relations, and product marketing teams for the machine learning operations scale-up. But separately, she also chairs the board of directors at Atlas Rosita, which is a management consultancy providing tech venture building, advertising, and design services. Now, having worked in diverse industries, the likes of cybersecurity, e-commerce, fintech, social impact, and machine learning, and at varied geographical locations, Tanu has worked across a wide range of operational, strategic, board, and advisory roles, all product and tech-oriented. So I shall not take up any time away from these distinguished panel of guests and Tanu. I'd now like to pass the time over to Tanu, who will be moderating the session. Tanu, please.
So thanks, everyone, for coming. I think Alberine was very kind in my bio. Really glad to see you guys all here. Actually, the panelists that I'm with are the impressive ones, so I'll have them each introduce themselves.
Thank you, Tanu, and very good afternoon to all of you here in London and London Tech Week. My name is Kieran. I'm the Deputy CEO of Infocom and Media Development Authority in Singapore. Together with the many Singapore agencies that are represented here today, our job is to create a vibrant and progressive digital economy in Singapore. And what do we do about it? We do a couple of things in my organization. One, we regulate certain sectors, including media, telecommunications, which is a traditional role. We protect consumers with data privacy laws and many others. But more importantly, we are developers of the ecosystem that we talk about, the tech sector and the tech ecosystem. So together with the Economic Development Board, which works with globally leading companies to come into Asia through Singapore and create good jobs and opportunities there, we're actively working in concert to create a vibrant ecosystem in Singapore. I'll be happy to share more about it when we go into the discussions as well. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kieran. So my name is Sharif El Sayed Ali. You can just call me Sharif and forget about my last name. So I'm co-founder and CEO of Carbon Ray. Carbon Ray is we are an artificial intelligence and climate tech startup. We are the first spin-out of both Cambridge University and UCL together. So essentially what we do is we're focusing on industrial decarbonization in heavy industries, so hard to abate sectors. So things like cement, steel, and chemicals. And what we do, just to give a very broad overview, is essentially we simulate the production processes within these manufacturing environments based on the data from the actual data from the plant. So actually build bespoke digital twins very quickly of the process, and are able to optimize this with an approach to artificial intelligence called reinforcement learning in particular. Sort of our main thing, sort of our North Star, our mission is to reduce emissions by the gigaton, at the gigaton scale every year by 2030. So we're not there yet, but that's the aim, and that's what we plan to get to. And I think I'll just, lots to say about the opportunities in ASEAN and Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here and good to see all of you here. My name is Vincent Anand Raj. I'll just do the typical biography and end with where I am today. Singaporean. I came over to the UK for university many years ago. And then I achieved my childhood dream of becoming an English teacher. So that's me by training. Then I went back to Singapore to help set up a school. And in the course of that, did a bit of a pivot and did fundraising for charities, and then moved back to the UK, based in Cambridge. And then I realized the skills you do for fundraising charitably is akin to fundraising commercially. So that's what I did. I worked with a number of Singaporean startups, and then I worked with startups in Europe, and that leads me to Cambridge Quantum Computing, where I am now working in business development. In 2015, 2016, I first got involved with them when they were fundraising. And towards the end of last year, Cambridge Quantum merged with Honeywell. So now it's the world's largest quantum computing company. And we are talking to companies in pharmaceuticals, in logistics, in steel, trying to come up with new materials, drug discovery, optimization, actually quite similar to what Tanu and Sharif are looking at as well. Yep, so that's me. And I've got experience with startups in Singapore, and I think that's why I'm here.
All right, thanks everyone for sharing your backgrounds. So we have the first question for the panel, which is, what trends and shifts have you seen in Southeast Asia that has helped to contribute to its rapid growth? Kiran, would you like to start us off?
Sure thing. So, if you think about us as the cheerleader of the tech ecosystem in Singapore and Southeast Asia, I've been doing this job over the last 10 years. And if I rewind 5 years ago, if you had come to Singapore, Singapore is well known as a financial hub, as a hub for Fortune 500 multinationals like GSK and many others from the UK and around the world to have their headquarters, R&D functions, and manufacturing to service the world and Asia. That was Singapore's positioning. Now, what has changed? In the last 5 years, we've seen a dramatic growth of Southeast Asia. So let me give you an analogy. If you take a 7-hour flight from Singapore and you draw a circle around that, more than half of the world population lives within that circle than outside that circle. 700 million people within Southeast Asia itself, 1 trillion in GMV for consumer demands in all sorts of services, from ride-hailing to digital services to food to entertainment to media to education to healthcare. That over the last 5 years has been a huge tailwind for the growth of the ecosystem in Southeast Asia and in Singapore. If you look at it today, we have global multinationals continuing to invest in Singapore for the growth of Asia in a very deep way, building products in Asia for Asia. But that's the story of the Fortune 500s. Let me share what's happened to the startup ecosystem. Today, we have more than 4,000 tech startups operating in Singapore. Some born in Singapore, some scaled up and raised from Singapore. We have more than 1,000 VCs, investors, family offices, and private equity hedge fund groups managing funds from Singapore for deployment into Southeast Asia. Just last year, more than 26 billion was invested in Southeast Asia startups alone, of which 12 billion came to Singapore, and Singapore today has about 12 unicorns and counting. I'm heartened to see that 5 years ago when I was here in London, I was talking to Wise Revolut, and many of the unicorns that you see here today to look at their global expansion plans and what Singapore could play for them. And in many ways, we were a convenient launchpad for London-born, UK-born startups to scale into Asia through Singapore. And that story continues with Deliveroo and many others coming to Singapore to tap the growth of Asia that I talked about. The second thing that has changed is that because in a very small geography, very much like London and UK, you have big multinationals, you have small startups, you have unicorns and decacorns operating in the very tight, seamless location. So what we're seeing now is that talent is attracted to tech. 5 years ago, talent was attracted to banking, consulting, and other industries. There has been a dramatic shift. So now if companies who are in tech, whether you're a startup, a scale-up, or a big multinational, you attract the best talent in UK and in Singapore. So in many ways, Singapore's story in Southeast Asia mirrors UK and London's story in Europe. Very much similar. Obviously, London is growing at a much faster clip. We have a lot to learn from you. But I think these are some of the drivers that has changed the nature of the ecosystem. And I think having that complementarity of capabilities, assets, organizations who can come together and partner very quickly to innovate new ideas. The key here is that companies have realized in order to tap the growth of Asia, you need to build in Asia for Asia. And therefore, they're building product development teams, headquarter operations, starting up, scaling up in Asia through Singapore. We have many attributes that have worked well for us for many years, and we continue to build upon them. But some of the key things that we have worked on is capital. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of venture capital and capital from other sources available in Asia, which was not that available 8 years ago. There has been a huge tailwind. The second one is people. We have had global, cosmopolitan, diverse talent pools operating in Singapore for many years, and we continue to be open to global talent to bring your ideas, bring your teams to build for Asia from Singapore. And the third is really ideas around the needs of Asia, which are quite distinct and unique from the needs of Europe, needs of Japan, needs of China, and the needs of the US. And therefore, that forms an excellent petri dish for global talent to come with new ideas to solve some of the problems in Southeast Asia. My last point here is that I mentioned a lot of the demographic growth, 1 trillion in GMV, 700 million in population, and that will continue to grow. But that speaks to the B2C side of the story, very much a consumer-driven growth. And I'll talk a little bit more about what's to come in the next round. So thank you.
Yeah, good. Well, before we continue, I have a quick question for you guys in the audience. How many people are founders? Please raise your hands. How many people are founders looking to expand to Southeast Asia? How many people are tech professionals? Okay. How many people are on the VC side of things, on the fundraising? Amazing. This just helps us to tailor the questions. Thanks for playing. So the next question is, how do you think that Singapore is well-suited to ride on the growth in Southeast Asia, given what you just talked about, the Southeast Asian environment? And how can Singapore respond to the fast-paced development that is ongoing?
Let me start.
Anyone?
You guys want to start?
The figure that Kiran just said about, is it 26 billion in terms of private funding? Deployed. Yeah, that's, if you look at yesterday, the British minister was talking about skills, and he was talking about London being the hub. If I'm not mistaken, the figure that he cited was also 26 billion last year. So in a sense, when you ask the question of what more can Singapore do to attract and to maintain and to lead the pack, I think the infrastructure is there. I don't think there needs to be a mad rush to get to the next stage, because it's an evolution, it's a growth. You can't jump, you have to go through the process. And I think Singapore's done it the right way, put the infrastructure in, take your time, and then the money will come. And I think the biggest example, although you might have questions about the real reason why he did it, I think James Dyson is a prime example of why someone big, innovative moved to Singapore. And what he's also done in moving there is not just steal the headlines, but he's also attracting the ecosystem, which I think the Singapore government is planning to build around that, electric batteries, giga plants, and everything else is going to grow around that. And I think there's a great opportunity for founders here to also ride on that wave that's being created, because the wave is there. You just need to get watch for it and just take the jump.
I wanted to add on, if you look at what we need to do differently given the trends that we see, I think if you ask us in terms of where are the new growth areas going to emerge, beyond the B2C examples that I mentioned earlier, in Southeast Asia and also in Singapore, I would say three. One is climate tech and sustainability. I think there's going to be a huge emphasis for that. Why? Many of the multinationals and big Asian companies that operate there, they're taking this seriously, and they're going to deploy serious capital beyond venture capital and work with startups who have good solutions in this space. Second is health tech. Everything around medical health delivery, preventive care, health care, and step-down care, which is enabled by technology, is going to be a huge driver. You heard Babylon on the main stage. That's another big driver that's happening in Singapore. The third one is really around food tech and food sustainability. Singapore has a vision that by 2030, 30% of our food supply is going to be originating and made in Singapore, which is why we are working with many new age technology companies to look at vertical farming, for instance. We are looking at alternative proteins being manufactured in Singapore for Singapore, but also for the world. And I think this is an area where we're going to see a lot more growth. And these are actually more B2B, B2 government sort of businesses where you need regulatory, beyond just capital and talent to come together. So I would say, if you think about Singapore and take a step back, our secret sauce for startups and also for large companies is the nexus of tech, business models, and innovation, and policy coming together, and where that's the magic happens. It's harder, it takes longer, but Singapore takes a long-term view to this. The capital that we deploy from the government and our partners takes that long-term view as well to support companies, and you'll see many of our sovereign wealth funds taking stakes in companies exactly in these three spots, because these are tough areas. It's important for us. There is a national need, there's a regional need, there's a global need. And we think that's an area that we're going to play in more. Another thing that we need to do differently beyond the sectors that we see emerging is in terms of policies. You heard today our Deputy Prime Minister, as well as Rishi Sunak, making mention of trade agreements with like-minded countries. So UK has just signed its first digital economy agreement with Singapore. It's a UK-Singapore digital economy agreement. It gives companies on both sides of the aisles preferential access, market access, regulatory certainty, and many other benefits, cross-border data flows, and many others, people flowing and ideas flowing. So I think that's an example of G2G highways that we need to create in a digital economy, because it's not about hubs, it's about two nodes in a global network. And our UK-Singapore partnership speaks to that. So that's the second thing we're doing more of with other like-minded countries, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and many more to come. In the industrial world, these were called free trade agreements. In the digital world, these are digital economy agreements. Other areas we're working on is how do you enable cross-border data flow and the world to remain open and not siloed by China walls, balkanization of data, because that will just slow down innovation for startups around the world. So I think these are some of the things that we're doing differently, and of course remaining open to global talent at various phases of their lives to come and participate in our ecosystem and connect the dots across the nodes in the network with Silicon Valley, New York, London, Singapore, Shanghai, Beijing, Bangalore. That's our ambition. So these are some of the things that we're doing to enable that to happen. And as you can see, this is very much an ecosystem play rather than a top-down, long-term strategic play, which is a shift that we had to make in terms of how we grow our economy and our people.
So then building from that, what do you think about the tech talent that is available in Southeast Asia and Singapore? Is Singapore poised well for this?
Yeah, so maybe just from my experience, so we're a young startup for sure, but I mean I've worked with in Singapore previously and also today, even with my startup, we are it was very impressive, and kind of is building on the kind of what you were talking about, Kieran, is that it's just not there is that drive and innovation that kind of permeates all areas of policy, of funding, of sort of just innovation. And we have what I found is that you have organizations, things like A*STAR, for example, which I don't know if we have an equivalent here, but it's somewhere between UK research, UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, but also like there's the applied research at the same time. But really driving some really absolutely cutting edge deep tech research, which, and that coupled with talent coming from universities like like NUS, for example, and you have a very, very rich and expert pool of talent that's coming up in Singapore. And I think it's not just Singapore. It's you find like other pools across the region. But obviously, one of the great things with Singapore that's for a UK-based company or startup is the language, and you have both of these things working very, very well together. So I kind of the way I think about it, kind of going to ASEAN and sort of expanding into ASEAN. And I think there's so many other reasons we'll come into later. But one of the key things is that you can actually build up tech teams and technology teams, building up products and solutions out of there. And it's not just kind of thinking, okay, like we'll go have a sales office and sell to the region. I think that's kind of the wrong approach, just to limit it to that. And I think there's something much, much richer that we can tap into.
Yeah, can I say something? Yeah, I will approach the question from the perspective of having been a teacher at a school in Singapore. And that was many years ago. I mean, so long that my students are now coming up to Cambridge, sort of doing their masters, and a number of them have set up their own startups. And I think that is a good sort of indication of the entrepreneurial spirit that's within the Singaporean students. I think many years ago, when I was growing up in Singapore, there was always this worry that all a Singaporean knows is within the confines of the textbook in front of him, but it's refreshing to know that actually all that is gone out the window, and Singaporeans are entrepreneurial, they're hungry, they're very conversant and very comfortable in tech. I mean, I've got a handful of former students who are all CEOs of their own tech companies, and I taught in an international school, so I've got Vietnamese students who have gone on also to start their own startups in Vietnam and in Indonesia, and some of them have gone on to the other side. Just last week I was helping a founder in the UK do a pitch to my former student who was sitting on the other side at Vertex Ventures, and he's the investment director. So you have the whole ecosystem, like what Kieran was saying, it's all developing. It's not just what we are saying. It's actually happening on the ground.
The funny thing is you mentioned that Singaporeans are becoming a lot more entrepreneurial, risk-taking, and I think this is a global movement, but I would say a lot of them tend to be young, not my generation. I still work for the government, so. But let me share with you the picture of the talent piece. Singapore is a very small economy. We have about 5 million people, 3.5 million in the workforce. Roughly about 220,000 of that workforce works in tech jobs, right? These are tech-heavy jobs. And actually, if you look at where they are working, about half of them work in the tech sector to provide IT services / product companies, startups, scale-ups, multinationals. The other half of that 220 actually work in tech teams in banks, governments, manufacturers, etc. So the need for tech talent is a horizontal game, no longer tech talent for the tech sector game. There has been a big shift in the last 5 years because of digitalization. So we think that's a happy problem, because actually the tech talent coming out of our ecosystem or coming from around the world, the opportunities are not just in the tech sector, it's everywhere, right? So I think that's one. Second, there isn't enough talent in Singapore. We have a shortage. But this is not unique to Singapore. It is on the lips of every founder, whether they are in Estonia, London, Silicon Valley, or Singapore. So this is a global problem. It's a skills crisis. It is a crisis. And I think the moment is now that we can work with industry in partnership with government and society to actually turn this around. Because if companies around the world, whether you're large or whether you're small, and you're just going to go to any ecosystem to poach or buy talent, that strategy may not be a sustainable one. So we've been working very actively with our ecosystem, and the Singapore government is pouring all our resources and a half because this is a very important crisis. And if we get it right, we'll not get it perfect, but if we get it right by working together with companies, I think we can create amazing careers, amazing startups, amazing innovations. Let me give an example. During the crisis, during COVID, there was a massive dislocation of jobs from certain sectors, hospitality, aviation, etc. We worked with large companies like Google, Microsoft, AWS, and others to quickly reskill some of this talent that were able and willing, skill them in jobs and skills that were needed now. And during the pandemic, we saw a huge growth in the need for tech skills, even during the crisis. And therefore, that program worked to actually pivot people into new careers and jobs. That's the first thing that we did. Second thing that we're doing right now is we're increasing the capacity in our universities and institutes of higher learning to have more ICT graduates coming out, because the need is just going to be growing sustainably into the future. This is not a short-term blip. Maybe there'll be some corrections in the short term, but we think this is a long-term secular trend. So we are betting the house on it in terms of training more Singaporeans in tech talent. We are also looking at how do we upskill Singaporeans who are working in tech, the 220,000 jobs, to upskill themselves so they continue to remain relevant and have a better career. So when 5G, AI comes to the fore, how do we reskill quickly those who have been in 4G, 3G, and other older technology stacks to pivot and continue to remain relevant up to their 50s and 55s? This is some of the things that we are already doing, and we are opening the doors wide for top global tech talent to come to Singapore. And we think this is a compendium of strategies to get it right and to get the ecosystem moving again. And I think we are onto the right track. Again, we're happy to learn from other ecosystems, but this is going to be a collective game. It is not about Singapore versus London, or it's not a competition of countries. It's two nodes in the network. We need to work together, and I think there's a lot of opportunities on the talent front as well.
All right, so thanks for sharing your opinions, and your background really helps to explain why tech talent is important. Just from my perspective, I have a consultancy that is headquartered in Singapore, and then I also have it's the same branch in the UK. And so setting up in Singapore was significantly easier than setting up in the UK as well. So just to say that the way to set it up through the government portals is just a lot easier. And there's a lot more structure involved. So when we were looking for funds, there's plenty of grants to look at. Especially if you're hiring Singaporeans, there's a couple of grants that are for early stage founders. There's some for the later stage, especially if you're set up in Singapore and then growing it more overseas. There are certain grants available for that as well. So there's a lot of those to look at. And personally, that's one of the reasons why we set up there. Of course, the other reason is that I'm Singaporean, so knew how to deal with the government in Singapore. But really, it is not just the policies that are in place, but actually there's a lot of structure in place as well at the same time. And so then building from that, with the upskilling and all the work that's been going in there, does that mean that how does that work with the Southeast Asian region in general, not just for Singapore? What do you guys think?
So I have a bit of a, well, my experience with Southeast Asia is extremely positive. So we're, as a startup, so we're kind of trying to move as fast as possible. But I don't know. I mean, the good thing is that there aren't that many investors in the room, and I'm not currently fundraising, so that's even better. But the advice you usually get is start local, national, then kind of expand bit by bit outside and prove yourself in, and so on. We went straight out to Asia, like first go, and never looked back, right? So we're working with customers, producers in Europe, in North America, but really the bulk of everyone we're working with is in the ASEAN region and in Asia and in India. And this is where and there's a very good reason for that, right? We're doing something that hasn't been done before. We're doing something that's very innovative, that's kind of cutting edge tech and so on. And there's always the certainty if you're a big kind of producer, manufacturer, and kind of wondering, is that, are we going to take a risk on these people? We've never heard of them and so on. But actually what we found is that there is so much more appetite and so much more willingness to try something new in places like Vietnam, in India, in Thailand, in Singapore than there are in than you find here or in the EU. And it's I know that possibly for people, sometimes companies startup space here, it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but that's the reality. And there may be many reasons for that, but I think that sort of the drive towards, the willingness to take the risk and the willingness to kind of really sort of leap forward, I think makes such a big difference. And I think is a huge driver, and it's a huge opportunity for startups. Whether if you're here, is really, I'd say depending on what you're doing, but really kind of looking into the ASEAN region and APAC in general pretty quickly is something I'd recommend.
Just, many of the startups over here who are looking at Southeast Asia, I mean, there are many things, policies, programs that every government is doing. My only message is, if you are interested in Southeast Asia, we have an EDB office, the Economic Development Board of Singapore here. And as and when you want to learn about the market, ready to expand into the market, we will provide concierge services for you to stitch what you need at various stages of your growth, so that you can leverage the networks, get connections, land in the market, and actually start up fast. So we're happy to see how we can support you in your journey in a very bespoke and a concierge fashion as well.
Just to add to what Kieran was saying, that Cambridge Quantum, we've got offices in Cambridge, London, a few in America, and then we open one in Munich. We're going to open one in Paris and then one in Spain, and we have one in Tokyo. And we have been speaking to EDB, just as Kieran was mentioning. So we are going through that process, considering Singapore as an office to open. And of course, being Singaporean, I'm sort of driving it, really pushing it. But I must say, it's very impressive the way the EDB works and the way they sort of handhold you, concierge you all the way through. And not just what the EDB does, but also the grants that are available, that if you want to set up an office in Singapore, they give you access to students. They will help fund the PhD students. So you don't have to be just a business setup there. You can also be a scientific setup there, and the business can grow there. So I do advise, if you're thinking about it, just to give the EDB a call, right? I'm not plugging them. I don't work for them.
Well, then, on the topic of fundraising, what do you guys think about how to actually get investments in from the Southeast Asian region? And how has that worked in your experience?
Say something very quickly. So I just said I'm not fundraising, but I'm also always fundraising. So if anyone is... so come talk to me.
So my experience of fundraising for startups in Asia, and also from Europe and the UK. They're very different markets. One is more mature, one is hungry and energetic to take the leap to get onto the scale of what's already established in America and the UK and in Europe. So you've got the two. In terms of differences, it could more be the risk appetite and also the area. So I can't generalize saying that healthcare experience is the same as raising money for quantum, which I must say, when I did it in 2018, was probably the most difficult area to raise money for. And when I did it for hardware, it's even harder than for software. But that was good experience. What I find now, especially in Singapore, with the almost exponential growth in family offices setting up in Singapore, I think that has changed the paradigm in quite a sizable way, where you have large pots of cash with the families, the second or third generation. They want to make a big impact, and tech is very attractive. So they're willing to park their patient capital, not for the 3 to 5 years VC style or 7, but for longer. And the way they support the startup is also important, because a lot of these family offices come from traditional sort of manufacturing or commercial. So they do have a vast array of customers that they can plug you into from day one. So I do think that the growth of family offices is having an impact. The VCs in Singapore are starting to be Singapore only or Southeast Asia only, plus one in America, plus one in Israel, plus one in the UK. And you know, it's just going to grow sort of international. And understandably, they are starting slow, but then they are growing. But it's quite a vibrant society of investors, and one which is full of capital waiting to deploy.
Just a quick one. So beyond capital, we have also recognized that startups which are growing up in our ecosystem, which are deep tech. We mentioned about patient capital, long sales cycle, product development cycle. And we're also seeing deep tech companies or B2B tech companies coming from overseas, landing in Singapore to grow. What we have realized is that their biggest challenge is product market fit. And we have created a program within my organization where we actually work with startups in these spaces, in B2B and deep tech, to do technical due diligence on them and their product and their company. And what we do is we accredit them. And when we do this accreditation, they get preferential access to about $800 million worth of deals from the Singapore government and all enterprises operating in Singapore. So we have worked with about 100 such deep tech startups to give them access to this 800 million. And we're seeing good traction in that, because when you come to Asia in deep tech and B2B tech, you need a reference customer to then go to the rest of the region. So we found that that was a specific gap, and we're coming up with programs to fit that gap. And actually, when you can do that well, capital follows. You know, so I think some of the things that we're working on in our ecosystem.
Maybe if I just can add on that, because I think, I mean, going back to a point you made previously, that sort of the three key areas are identified, climate tech, health tech, and food tech, and food generally. But because they're all very much deep tech areas, but kind of even looking at the economic situation at the moment and sort of all the uncertainty, what we know for sure is that, you know, where things are going to be prioritized is going to be things that are service a real need and a very kind of things that have to be done. And these are very much the areas that are there. And I know that broadly speaking, many VCs have been sort of, like deep tech is kind of a little bit uncomfortable, right? You're not doing kind of, you know, a product and you get like SaaS product or something and you know, get like lots of revenue quickly or not, and then you know what's going on. But I think the future is going to be deep tech. And I think that's like, you know, for fast forward 10 years, 20 years from now, all these big companies, all of that are going to be companies who are really solving those kind of bigger intractable problems. So I think it's a fantastic kind of setting up and essentially giving almost that sort of that first injection of money of success to enable that is really important.
May I ask, will you be taking questions?
Yeah, in just a bit.
Okay.
Yep. I think about 5 minutes. But did you have a burning question? Yes.
Particularly about what you're talking about now, because there may be UK tech entrepreneurs who are getting quite excited now about the idea of all this support they can get to start in Singapore and go to Southeast Asia. But how would they know if they're ready for it? I mean, should they be revenue generating? God forbid, should they be generating a profit? I mean, is there a sort of a checklist, or what advice can you give to say, check this out, and if you meet these criteria, give me a call?
I'll let the experts start first, and I'll provide my perspective as well.
Well, give them a call now. No, that's honestly what we're here. It's not for me to decide or for anyone on this panel to decide, but I think reach out now and start a conversation. Because I'm sure you have, Kieran, that's your role.
What's a typical sort of shape and size?
So I'll share my perspective. And again, different subsectors, different companies will have a very different answer. But if I were to generalize it, we are quite keen to engage with companies that are past startup. They have some traction. Traction could be you have a product, you have a customer, you have revenue, and you have a team that is building a product. So if you're, it's pretty hard if you're born in another ecosystem and you just have a business plan and a founder to say that now I want to just uproot and move to Singapore. It happens, but it tends to be rare. What we have seen is that typically once you have product, revenue, customer, and you have traction, and you may have now some capital, either through VCs or others who demand growth, and you need to address new customers or new geographies for talent, or an acquisition. Typically, these are your trigger points of saying that I want to do an acqui-hire here, I got a big customer there, or there's a large talent pool that I want to tap on because I got VC funding to build another hub, another feature, another product. Typically, these are the features that we see in companies. They tend to be, again, generalizing, they tend to be companies that are 50 people and up, generally speaking. When they start to have these conversations, and if they have some of these attributes, they'll probably be ready. In some sectors, faster. In some sectors, slower. But there are always, ways to actually test the market without going full hog, right? So there's Tech Nation over here that works with many of the startup ecosystem. We work with them quite closely, and we bring their stable of startups to actually explore opportunities in Asia, in Singapore. They'll come on a visit, they'll meet the ecosystem, they'll meet like-minded companies, partners for potential partnerships, cross-selling opportunities, first reference customer. You don't need to have a presence there yet. But once you see some traction, you may decide, okay, now I'm ready to have 2-3 people on the ground. And that's when it starts. Then you get more traction, then you're like, oh, okay, wait a minute, I got money, I want to do this, and then you start growing. So it's typically not an overnight, like a multinational will do it this way. I want to set up a 300-man operation from zero. For startup, it typically doesn't happen that way. So leverage on the resources that you have with Tech Nation. We have a UK-Singapore DEA. We have both ways, Singaporean companies coming here, UK companies coming to Singapore. Look at us, explore us, we'll be happy to host you there for you to get a pulse and a reality feel. And then as your business evolves, we have a relationship. We can come in to see when you are ready, because it's always when the company is ready. It's not about we pulling you, it's about you coming to us. And then we will see how we can support you, catalyze that, accelerate that, and make your journey a smooth one, and hopefully a successful one.
Maybe just to add that, and I think the key is because, as a founder myself, startups have limited resources, right? And making a profit is something that happens eventually, at some point. We all hope. But even if not, like all the money coming in will be spent on continuing development, on expansion, on scaling, and all of that. So, and I think especially with the economic conditions, it's very important to be careful with the capital that we have. But at the same time, the opportunities are there, and the ways to explore them in a softer manner are there. So whether it's with visits, looking at potential kind of reference clients and so on. So there's a way to kind of do it carefully, but also like not let the opportunities go. But we started the company in lockdown, and that meant that, there's all the problems of starting a company in lockdown. I can tell you many of them. But one of the advantages is that it sort of doesn't make a difference if you're kind of talking to a customer in Hull or in Bangkok. Apart from the time difference, but like you can't see them anyway, you can't visit them. So it almost forces you to kind of look at opportunities in a slightly different way. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, sorry, just one. And one, especially to address your question, perhaps turn it the other way around and say that if you feel you're early in terms of pre-revenue, forget about profit, perhaps you want to engage with some of the VCs in Singapore and approach them to see whether you can secure any funding, because once that's secured, you're sort of halfway there. So that could be another way of approaching it. Yeah.
Yep. Before we continue, I actually have something to add as well. So from a product management perspective, I think it'd be interesting to look at where your customers are, and if you're trying to target people more in the Asian market, then having a base in Southeast Asia and Singapore does make a big difference. Specifically what Kieran was saying with product market fit. So being able to establish that would make a big difference for why you would want to set up at all. So that's another consideration to have. Might as well do questions. Anyone else? Yep.
Talking about funding and various stages of the company's growth, given that there's this buoyancy and exuberance around funding, which you've shared with us, whether it's the development of family offices or more VCs, do you think going down the corporate finance route, or in particular how to navigate where those particular companies sit in terms of what they invest in, and which sector, whether it's health tech or other, is that something the EDB signposted to? Or is that, so one, would you recommend that you go through one particular house to
Yeah.
And you don't want that. You want to be selective.
Yeah, so the government's role is always to be a facilitator and introduce the connections in the ecosystem. And of course, at the end of the day, the VCs will decide what they want or not do. So we'll be happy to curate the ecosystem to say that these are the VCs who typically focus on this, these are doing that. Maybe instead of talking to everyone, you want to start here. Yeah, we'll be happy to see how we can help on that front.
There was a question here.
Yeah, when you use the word tech, you're talking about sort of tech talent and the tech ecosystem. Are you implying computer science there, or life sciences, biology, stuff like that? I guess I just have an assumption that it's probably leaning towards computer science. I wanted to check that assumption.
So when I say tech talent, I loosely mean not biotech talent per se. I mean more like developers, software developers, product developers, data science, computer science, etc. But having said that, the field of tech is diverging and converging at the same time. So we see health tech, clean tech, climate tech. I mean, there's all this confluences happening. When I said in terms of what we're doing in terms of tech talent, it's really more around some of the others. But we do in Singapore have a large biotechnology cluster as well. So companies like GSK making vaccines, APIs in Singapore, and therefore we have graduates coming out to do that. But yeah, but when I was referring to tech, I was referring to the others.
Go ahead.
My client can be here today because he couldn't get his visa. I actually live in Cambodia, and he runs a tech company in Cambodia. He's got 150 employees. He runs a smart grid company, basically. He works with the Cambodian government, detecting the faults in the national grid. He wants to expand. Okay? He's already got the money. He's already got a very nice revenue stream. What he doesn't have is the skills and the contacts to expand into Southeast Asia. Is there anything with nationalities? I mean, do you allow other nationalities outside the UK, or because he's from Cambodia, it's a Cambodian company, would you give him the same resources, or does he have to be from the UK?
No, we are happy to speak to any entrepreneur idea who wants to expand, whether it's from Cambodia, Myanmar, Vietnam, or London.
Good question. Yeah.
Hi. So one of the questions, I know the population in Singapore, it's quite small. So if you're looking at doing business with a massive scale, I hear from people who haven't been in Singapore, is that the next corridor is Malaysia. Cost-wise, it's quite. Do you see with the geopolitical situation with China, there is a lot of talent moving to the surrounding, if you like, the present around China, and companies are being based in Singapore?
Well, the last 2-3 years have been, there are many geopolitical shocks for various reasons. And I think going back to my very first comment that I made, Southeast Asia is becoming interesting to big or small companies because of just the market around. We are not just seeing startups from around the world coming in to tap that growth. We are seeing American companies looking, big and small companies, looking at the next theater of growth. They've conquered US, they more or less have Europe, and they more or less have Japan. There are only 2 other markets to attack. It's India and it's Southeast Asia. So you can see a lot of investments coming into India and Southeast Asia as a priority, partly because certain markets are not so open for them. We see the same for European companies. We also see the same with Chinese companies. After China and the massive growth that they had, where's the next growth theater for them? Southeast Asia. So in a way, Southeast Asia is becoming the United Nations of tech, that you have companies from around the world operating in a market, fighting it out, competing. And I think that forms a very vibrant ecosystem that you may or may not see in other parts of the world, because actually that confluence of companies, talent, and what we're starting to see is, I loosely call it a talent supercycle, circulating between companies which are American, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, large, small, founders, workers. And that is starting to spin, and we think that's where the magic is going to be in terms of unlocking a lot of innovation.
So as an Egyptian, I'm going to have to add Africa to the list as a huge, but
I noticed that the omission of Africa.
I have to. But ASEAN and India are obviously. So the thing for me is why Singapore makes so much sense is obviously there is small population, yes, but it's at the heart of the region, and as a place to really kind of look at all the markets and all the growth that's happening in the region, I think it's for a company coming from the UK, for example, or elsewhere, I mean, the things that you look for is, the stability of kind of the legal certainty, strong IP protection, a sort of public policies and government policies that are encouraging innovation and really pushing that forward, and language, and then the local talent. So I think it's just, I mean, these things make it, like, for me, it's like, it makes so much sense that's the first place to go in the region. And then you're kind of thinking of, because actually being in Singapore, I mean, obviously there's all the travel is easy, but also, as you're saying, kind of you have all these multinationals, these regional companies that have their innovation functions. A lot of that is actually based in Singapore. So you're also kind of, even in the direct ecosystem, you start kind of building these connections to the rest of the region.
Just to add to that, as founders, I know working with founders, how you just think about work, product, fundraise, customers. You must also think about when you want to let your hair down. And I think if I was to reduce Kieran's 7-hour circumference to 2 hours, I think you have all of the best tourist spots. So that's another reason to go to Singapore. And I would approach Singapore as a hub rather than a destination. And I think that's what makes it truly attractive to the region.
Just to ask, just one remark. Food in Singapore is fantastic. So that's one thing. And actually, I have a question because here, I mean, I know anyone who's had to register through the tax office here as a company will know that there is about 8 different logins just to do kind of, each form requires a different registration, a different login, different letter. And I hope it's a bit easier in Singapore.
Very much so. But today, I think London wins hands down.
For example, in UK, the export is both product and services, and only 50 to 80% ratio. What about the consultancy services market, especially DI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in Singapore, or even the ratio? Because a lot of multinationals are going on, and they are focusing in the West on this issue.
So you're referring to the need for professional services in diversity, inclusion, to service the corporates when they need that. Yeah, so I think that's clearly a huge growing space. ESG is another. And I think these are growth areas that a lot of companies in Asia are looking at very actively. So I think certainly there's a demand for that. So in a way, what if you see that happening in UK and London, you probably see that happening in Singapore in terms of demand and need. Because in many ways, it's a mirror. What UK is to the Europe and Middle East and Africa region is what Singapore is to Asia. So, and many of the companies that operate in these two ecosystems tend to be the same, with similar products and services. So I think that is where I said, actually the UK and the London ecosystems mirror Singapore quite nicely.
But demographic may be different.
Demographic may be different. The specific nuance and needs in each of these areas could be culturally nuanced and different depending on the context, but certainly there's a demand for those services. So which is where some of these services businesses will also need to tweak in terms of the practice areas that they focus on, given that diversity and difference. Because of obviously Europe and the UK are overall more developed markets, whereas Asia and Southeast Asia is developing. So I think then the demands are there, but then the specific needs may be slightly different.
Well, I have a professional services consultancy in Singapore and the UK. And so we're definitely always looking at various areas to expand. But actually on diversity and inclusion specifically, because Asia is such a mix of diverse cultures, like India itself has like 2,000 languages, right? And then if you look at Singapore, we have 4 national languages. So there's so much diversity in itself. It's inherent in the culture. It's a bit easier to talk about diversity and inclusion because you get it. You just look around and you see various people who look different. And so I think while there isn't a structured push for diversity inclusion services in Singapore, it exists because it has to, in some sense.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, in that case, let's do closing statements. What do you think, if there was one thing you wanted the audience to take away from this session, what would you want them to know about Singapore's ecosystem?
I would say don't hesitate, just pick up the phone and just call and find out. You'll be surprised at what you would learn. And at the end of the day, even if you decide not to, at least you've learned something.
Yeah, I'd say, and especially if you start up, obviously, kind of always sort of keep an eye on the cash flow and, kind of be cautious, especially in these conditions. But definitely don't also just look at the ecosystem, look at the opportunities in ASEAN, and look at Singapore, as a place to start. I think, kind of as you said, you're probably much more likely to be happily surprised than the other way around.
I think the next 1 or 2 years is going to be a tough ride, given what we're seeing in the capital markets, inflation, etc., funding availability. So I think if you're a startup right now, if I was a founder, I'll be focusing on conserving cash, focusing on my teams, and focusing on where I need to prioritize to remain in business. But there will be startups also that during these tough times will continue to grow gangbusters, continue to grab capital, continue to acquire, and continue to hire. If you are in the latter category, come and talk to us. If you are in the former category, come and talk to us. Because when you are ready, we are happy to see how we can assist you. So if I could have my EDB colleagues in the room, so that they are based in London, so pick up the phone, call them, have a chat. So we have Chilin over there. Say hi. He's based here in London, so we are here. We have some of our colleagues from SGN as well, who are based over here. So pick up the phone, call them, talk to them after this, share it with your friends. We're happy to help. We know it's going to be a tough time for the tech sector. There are going to be layoffs, both in Singapore, in London, in the US, globally. I think that's a reality. And it is going to be tough, but I think if we look at the silver lining from this, there were a lot of excesses. There's going to be some correction, but I think companies which are strong foundationally, have a good product, and have a sustainable business model will come out of this winning. And we're completely committed to see how we can work with these companies to scale globally. And when it comes to Asia, happy to be that launchpad. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you very much, Tanu, Kiran, Sharif, and Vincent. So I'm based in Singapore, so I can relate to what Sharif said. I've been away from Singapore, from home for 3 weeks, so I've already decided what is the first meal I'm going to have when I get home. So for those of you missing Singapore food, well, yeah, too bad. So anyway, I think in addition to the practical information or the technical information about setting up businesses in Singapore, another element of it where I come from the Singapore Global Network, is we are a community builder. And what we are looking to do is really building networks and community comprising of tech professionals or tech talent. So it could be tech professionals, venture capitalists, startup founders, really being able to bridge that global network of people in the tech ecosystem so that a lot of our platforms, offerings, or even vehicle like London Tech Week enables us to enlarge that network and also broker connections between the members of our network, broker that connections between, say, Singapore government entities or even within the members themselves. And we also have things like if you're ready to move, you want to get a sense of how is it like if you're moving with your accompanying family members, your spouses, how is it like in terms of living in Singapore, the school education system, the international school education system, the tech system in Singapore, what kind of employment passes or dependent passes for your accompanying children, for example. The Singapore Global Network actually have a wide comprehensive of relocation guides, we call it. It's not something that we pull it out on the air, out from the air, but they are actually contributions from the members of our community. So you get things that you don't typically or may not hear about from websites or some expatriate websites or communities out there. So feel free to check us out. And with that, I think, as I mentioned earlier on, this is our last and final session of our 2-day program, by the Singapore Economic Development Board, Singapore Global Network, as well as SG Innovate. And I thought it's quite timely to actually pass the time over to our Senior Vice President of Branding, Marketing, Communications, Ziki, to kind of close the session for us.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. To our speakers, our panelists, and to all of you who joined us the last 2 days. You know, the discussions have been so animated, it's been very engaging. And it's really heartening to see, you know, the two communities, both in the UK and Singapore, to be so passionate. The discussions were so passionate around tech for good, around things that are concerning the world today. So I really want to encourage us, you know, together with all the community builders and institutions here, to please let's stay connected. Because truly together, we really can make a difference and address some of these issues that we're all facing. And I'm very, very happy that our NFT art, we've sold over 50%. Very good. Pretty impressive. From I don't think any art galleries have actually achieved those numbers. So we have 5 more days to go. Please join in and contribute, because it really does go towards charity. And this is just one small example of how we're doing tech for good. So with that, I thank you again. Please approach us and let's stay connected and continue this discussion. Let us not end here. Let's make something happen. Thank you.